Leo is a tiny, useless, orphan boy who is betrayed by the people he swore to protect and is reincarnated as a powerful demon lord to destroy all of humanity and clap his hot goddess. In the year 447, the demon lord's army advances on the humans, but one of the 6 heroes wipes them out, reviving the humans in the process. Meanwhile, in the fortress, Sherry and Blackus report to Demon Lord Magnus that their forces are getting cooked, and they're the last ones standing. At that moment, a dragon attacks the fortress as the saints prepare to take it down with the help of his former comrade, Arakel, so he plans to go out there and burn them all to the ground, but Blackus tells him that he needs to keep his promise to the goddess of rebellion, Roselia, and survive. So he calmly accepts his defeat to the humans but promises to rise again in 1,000 years to reclaim his throne. Many years later, 2 hot girls go on a scouting mission to investigate some underground ruins, hoping to find the Void's nest, but they discover some grave goods, which means someone important is buried nearby. As they go deeper into the ruins, they arrive at a sealed door with a strange inscription on it. So Regina leaves to explore the rest of the ruins while Celia stays to figure out the message. But as she touches the door, it reactivates and lets her in. After entering, she sees a large room with purple flames and a large crystal at the end of it, with someone inside and decides to help them. In a flashback, Lord Magnum met with Roselia and agreed to find her human vessel after resurrecting, and then she disappeared. In the present, Celia tries to break the crystal by shooting at it, which wakes up the Demon Lord, who breaks it apart from the inside. As he gets closer to her, he notices that she's a baddie and hesitates to kill her, but she calls him a child, causing him to see his reflection and realize that something must have gone wrong with his reincarnation. She then asks him how he ended up in the crystal, but before he can organize his thoughts, she assumes he has amnesia and embraces him, promising to protect him as he suffocates from her huge melons. Later on, she gives him her cookie, and as he eats it, he wonders why he was turned into an ugly loser who can't talk to girls. Then she introduces herself as a member of the Excalibur Academy, and he decides to play along to get information about the present, calling himself Leonis, a name from his past life. Meanwhile, as Regina searches for the nest, some crystals grow behind her, and she activates her holy sword weapon to attack. Back in the hall, she tells him that voids are enemies of humanity that appeared 64 years ago, rumored to have come from another world. So he asks her what year it is in the Holy God calendar, but she tells him it's year 64 on the human calendar. As he wonders what the is going on, the room begins to shake and Regina radios in to warn her of void activity. So she jumps on him to protect him, and he feels his tool rising. An ogre-class void emerges, and none of her shots are effective on it. So he decides to show her how it's done, but trips and falls on his face. Just before it can attack, Regina appears and shoots at it to keep it away while he stares at her huge cannons, wondering how such weapons work. She then tells them to head for the exit while she holds it off. So they run away, but are suddenly stopped by another void that's even more powerful than the last. So he tries to activate his powers and save her, but she pushes him aside, telling him to get to safety while she charges at it with her sword, but gets slashed and smacked aside.
Stupid!
Then he rushes to her as she bleeds out, and she tells him to escape with Regina while more of the voids surround them. As he holds her hand, she apologizes for not being able to protect him, and dies while he remembers a familiar scene with Roselia when he was the one dying. Then the monsters try to attack him, but a protective barrier forms around him, so he summons his staff and uses gravity magic to crush the dragon void and crystal magic to penetrate the other one. As the last void tries to escape, he rushes after it and uses his fire magic to burn it, but he notices that he can still see its remains, which means his power is only 1/3 of his original strength. Then he decides to repay her for risking her life for him, and uses his death magic to bring her back to life, leaving a magic seal on her thigh and fangs on her teeth, and he knows that she's going to lose her shit when she finds out. In the other room, Regina finishes dealing with the void and tries to radio Celia, but he doesn't know how to use human technology to respond. Then she wakes up, happy to see he survived, and asks how she's still alive, but he downplays her injuries and says he only used a minor spell to heal her. However, she's never heard of sorcery before and tells him you must mean a holy sword, which is the power the humans use to fight the voids in the shape of weapons. She explains that it's what Regina used to save them, but she has been unable to unlock hers. Then, Regina finally catches up to them, seeing her bloodstains, and they ask what happened to the voids, but he plays dumb and tells them they disappeared. When they leave the ruins, she tells him to come with them, and on the way, Regina introduces herself as Celia's maid. But he's unable to concentrate on anything other than her huge cannons. Suddenly, he sees their city, and she tells him that the booty-looking city is the 7th Assault Garden 6 years ago. A massive swarm of voids wreaked havoc, as the Holy Swordsmen used their technology to try and defeat them. Inside a safe space, a young Celia assures Regina that everything will be okay as her entire family was outside battling the voids and had never lost a single fight. To distract themselves from the terrifying war outside, she continued to talk about her plans for the future, but she wet herself after the power went out. When the war finally ended, they'd found that the city had been destroyed and her family had been wiped out. In the present, they reach the city, and she tells him that it's a mega float that travels around to fight voids as he's surprised to see how far humanity has gone. Then Celia reports to her superiors about the mission, mentioning that they found a refugee who possesses a holy sword. So he asks who the f*** they're calling a refugee, and they explain that refugees are people who have been driven away from their homelands by the void. But he would now get to live with them at Excalibur Academy and learn how to use his holy sword. She then directs him to a special door for newbies, where he has to undergo an examination, and leaves to wait for him at the exit. When he enters the room, he drops the act and laments that his plan to bring humanity to its knees has gone to shit now that they've developed some insane technology, and he's stuck in the body of a useless child. Then he summons Blackus and Sherry, and they're shocked to see him in this form, but they ask for his command, and he tells them to investigate the humans' military strength without drawing attention with their spells. Afterward, he heads through the checkpoint, but he causes it to overload, so he suppresses his mana and is allowed out, where he receives his new ID, but Celia grabs it from him and takes a picture for his holy sword inquiry to become a student. Next, she shows him around town and brings him to Excalibur Academy, where all military affairs are handled. As she continues the tour, she suddenly feels a pain in her head and bends down to rest, but she sees other students training and hopes to join them soon and activate her holy sword. Then he wonders how Suck, a weak loser, ended up in a military academy when they run into Rhodes, who says the same thing but out loud. She tries to ignore him, but he stops her and asks about the little boy. And when she refuses to answer, he laughs at her, saying she's only good for babysitting. So she snaps back and says he's actually a holy swordsman. But he doesn't believe her and tells her to join his platoon of brain-dead, ugly bitch instead, and Leo figures that he's just a sick man of culture. Since she believes she's not that ugly, she tries to walk away. But he grabs her by the hair, which angers Leo. So he casts a mind spell on him and scares the shit out of him, causing him to pray to God, while Leo calls him an uncultured swine that'll never touch a bad bitch again. When he stands up, he calls out his holy sword to attack, but is stopped by Fine, who reminds him that holy swords are forbidden in personal fights and threatens to report him to the Administration Bureau. After scaring him off, she introduces herself as a member of Celia's platoon, who's in charge of data analysis, and scans his size for a school uniform. Suddenly, Celia stumbles and rests on a tree, and he suspects she'll soon figure out what's happened to her. Later, she shows him to their platoon's dorm, but he says it looks like a rundown mess compared to the other dorms. So she explains that the dorms are assigned based on the platoon's achievements. Then she takes him up to her room, and he asks if it's okay for him to be in a female dorm. But she tells him he's just a kid as she begins to undress and sends him to the bathroom. While he's in there, he struggles to figure out how the shower works, so she joins him. But he's not sure it's okay to do it with a minor. So she tells him that it's fine since he's a boy. While she rubs him hard, she asks him to join her platoon, even though she's a failure to her family. So he asks why she'd bother putting herself in danger at all. But she insists that she'd rather be the one fighting. Suddenly, she falls down, unable to move. So he runs his hands up her thighs and activates the magic seal, putting her in the mood to suck on him. When she asks why she just did that, he reveals that he lied about his healing powers and that she's actually dead. The next morning, he watches over her as she shivers in bed, and when she wakes up, she wonders how she got to bed, and he tells her he used his skills to get her there. When she asks him who he is, he says that he's the reincarnation of an ancient sorcerer, and used a magic spell to make her undead, making her the ultimate vampire queen. He then explains that her weakness from the previous day was because she had insufficient mana, and would need to replenish her mana supply to survive. Even though she should be losing her shit from this information, she decides to tell him about her past, explaining that she comes from a long line of holy sword users and she thought fighting voids would awaken her power. When she asks him if being dead would stop her from receiving a holy sword, He tells her he doesn't know but assures her she'll be much stronger than before. Later, he wears the uniform, and they head to the cafeteria where she tells him that nutrition is important. But he says it's ironic coming from a talking corpse. He then offers to pay for the food, showing her his shiny gold coin, but she tells him that gold is no longer as valuable and realizes his 2,000 gold coin fund is now as worthless as an NFT. Just then, they see Sakuya getting harassed by two men she owes money, and when they ask her to remove her clothes as payment, she hits them where the sun doesn't shine and tells them to come back for their money later. Then Celia asks her what that was about, so she casually explains that she was hoping to get lucky at the casino, but ended up losing all her money. After noticing him, she introduces herself as a member of the platoon, shakes hands with him, and they settle down to eat. Later on, Celia takes him to the inquiry test, where his instructor tells him to show her his holy sword. So he brings out his tool, and when she asks what it can do, he says it depends on the position. Next, he's asked to fight void simulators, and while she sets up the simulator on her tablet, he destroys all the machines in 1 second, failing to tone it down as he'd hoped. As she wonders how a young boy's tool can cause so much damage, a crowd gathers around to observe, and Rhodes volunteers to fight him instead. He agrees that he'd be no different from the pile of useless garbage he just destroyed, which angers him, so he summons his holy sword, giving the rest of his team weapons too. When Celia protests that 4 against 1 is unfair, he says that's how his holy sword works, so she offers to join Leo to face them, and the instructor allows it. Before they begin, they wager that if she loses, she'll have to join his platoon, but if he loses, they'll finally leave her alone. The battle begins and she charges in with her sword, easily going toe-to-toe with his brain-dead minions, so while she's distracted, he sends one of them after Leo, and she sends a lightning attack, but he blocks it with his shadow spell, which then wraps around her and stops her. Meanwhile, Regina rushes to meet up with Leo's inquiry, but she arrives just in time to see Celia take out the other girls and challenge Rhodes directly. However, he waves his small tool, and she's unable to move as he disarms her, barely stopping himself from using his tool on her in front of everyone. Before he finishes her off, he decides to take care of Leo first, who has been cornered by the other girls, but before he attacks, her holy sword appears, and she's able to break free from his control. Immediately, she jumps at him and destroys his wand, causing all the other weapons to disappear, and he quickly surrenders while Regina rushes to congratulate her on her new sword. Later, she thanks him, but he says there's no need to since she's his minion and has to protect him, so she asks him to make her even stronger, and he agrees. Then they have a feast to celebrate Celia's holy sword awakening and Leo's induction into their platoon, with all the members present. Then Fine says that she needs to upload his biodata and asks him to stop by her room later to give it to her. Then the girls argue about whose room he should stay in, but he chooses to stay with Celia and explore her new vampire kinks. Afterward, Fine uploads the data while he asks about her holy swords, so she reveals that she used to be an attacker in her previous platoon until she watched 2 of her friends die and she lost her abilities. Then he notices her map and asks if he can use it, and after examining it, he notices a correlation between where his armies fought in the ancient battles and where the voids have been popping up, so he summons Blackest to give him an update. He tells him that he discovered that the island is powered by a massive mana crystal called a power plant and leaves to continue his investigation, just as Sherry appears to give her report, but hands him a donut instead. But when he tells her to stop goofing around, she says that nobody seems to know who he is or has any memory of the battles that took place years ago, which he finds suspicious. Meanwhile, a team of divers investigates a mysterious site, expecting to find a void outbreak, but they discover a plant-like entity that calls out for Leonis and attacks the divers. In the year 432, Leonis followed a man who needed help as part of his duty from the crown, while the other heroes protected the holy city. But as he reached the location of the request, the man vanished, and a group of sorcerers appeared, trapping him with magic seals as the guards rushed to chain him up. As he struggled to free himself, they rushed forward and stabbed him with their spears until he gave up, saying he no longer posed a threat to their master. But after they left him for dead, Rosalie appeared and asked him if he hated them for betraying him, but he said he didn't consider them evil because that's how the world is. However, she tells him she plans to rebel against the world and asks if he'll join her, saying she's had her eyes on him for a while. In the present, he commands Celia to wake up, and when she's forced up from her sleep, it explains that the magic seal on his hand allows him to force obedience on his minions. So she asks him if he wants her to do dirty things to him, but he tells her she smells like death and asks her if she sucked on him while he was asleep. And when she says she couldn't help herself, he understands since he's an irresistible demon, but would like her to ask him for permission next time. Suddenly, her phone rings, and when she picks up, Fine tells her that a strategy meeting has been called about the data from the researchers who went on a marine survey, promising to keep her updated. Meanwhile, the acting commander is informed about the deaths of the platoon members from the previous mission, and their analyst informs him that they detected void activity at the site and pulls up a blurry image of the entity. They suspect it might be a void lord, which could cause another stampede, but they say they are ready to exact their revenge and consider an immediate evacuation. However, they receive a phone call from the commander, who tells them to hold off on evacuating and carry out follow-up investigations instead. At the training center, Celia practices her swordsmanship, but he tells her that her strength as a vampire queen lies in her mana supply, promising to teach her some new moves later. Then he picks up his staff to summon soldiers of the underworld for her to practice on, and she charges in and cuts through them with her sword till she turns them all into a pile of bones, exhausted from her session. After, she thanks him for his help and offers to take him somewhere and give it to him. At the same time, the reconnaissance mission begins as a new set of divers approach the site of the incident. Back at the dorm, Regina asks her why she's still in uniform, and she explains that she's helping to analyze the data from the reconnaissance mission and wants to be ready if she's called on. Meanwhile, Sherry gets a job at a bakery, hoping to earn money to buy Leo more sweets, but she sucks at her job and ends up slicing everything she's given. So she's sent to the front to sweep just as Celia and Leo arrive, and she watches her flash her donuts at him, which angers her. Later, they arrive at an orphanage where she works part-time, and the kids remind him of his time on the streets, so they head inside, where one of the kids lifts her skirt.
Huh?
And as he's about to end his short life, she says it's okay since she likes little boys. As he watches her interact with the kids and the owner of the house, he sees that it is a place that she wants to protect, and when he thinks about his past fortress, he realizes that he no longer has a place to protect. Back underwater, the teen reaches the site but can't find the entity. But inside, a worker hears a banging sound coming from the walls. At that moment, Fine discovers data indicating vibrations beneath the city, while other crewmen discover a room covered in tree roots as a creepy face emerges and observes them. Back in the year 428, a group of monsters attacked Rognus' kingdom as Leomis, Tyrus, and Erikel watched. Unwilling to wait for the others, Erikel cast a spell that would wipe out the monsters along with the townspeople, hoping to resurrect the people afterward. However, before he could complete his dumbass plan, Leonis destroyed his spell and leaped into the city to fight off the monsters alone with his sword. As he jumped from the rooftops, cutting down the monsters, he used his bare hands to push the last monster off, and the people praised him for saving them. But Erikel called him dangerous and began his villain arc. In the present, Erikel continues to make his way through the crowd, while the analysts report that the unidentified entity has disappeared, so the general says they need to find it and eliminate it. Then she tells them that a student wants to share the results of her investigation with them, and after hearing that she's a member of the esteemed Philip family, they decide to hear her out. After connecting her to the team, she tells them that she found localized vibrations beneath the assault gardens, concluding that a void must have infiltrated the city. At that moment, they detect damage at another block and realize that the entity is acting more intelligently than a typical void would, so they plan to send a team out to investigate. Immediately, Regina tries to get a hold of Celia, but is unable to as communications are down. So Fine sends one of her drones to their location, and they brace themselves for a possible stampede. Back at the command center, they watch a feed of the dispatch team, asking if they should shoot the tree roots, but the roots suddenly grow eyes, and the footage cuts out as they scream that they're under attack. Then they realize that the entity is making its way underground because of the lack of security, so they try to ask the commander if they should proceed with an evacuation, but their comms have been shut off. As they make further arrangements, the feed from the storehouse returns, and when they ask if the entity has been eliminated, he says that it escaped. Then the analysts discover that it must be heading for the power plant, figuring that contact with the energy reserves may trigger another stampede, so they issue orders to protect the power plant. At that moment, the machines in gunmen at the plant begin to shoot down the entity, and as the operation continues, the acting commander orders for the city to shift to fortress mode, with an immediate evacuation and deployment of military personnel for the impending invasion. While the chaos unfolds, the children ask him to show them his holy sword, but he feels uncomfortable giving it to children. So Celia encourages him to show them a sneak peek, and in a bid to impress her, he shows them his bones. The entity finally reaches the power plant, and the effect is felt throughout the city, prompting Leo and Celia to go outside, where they see that another stampede has begun, as the voids appear from the sky. The tower activates its defense systems and launches a signal in the sky while back in the command room. They estimate the city can hold out for the next 3 days before help arrives from the capital. As the city goes into defense mode, Regina and the others wait for Celia to arrive at their assigned district, while the defense systems begin to fire at the voids, managing to take a couple out. Then they head to the rooftop and summon their holy swords to join in the battle. Back at the orphanage, Celia fails to get in touch with the academy and rushes inside to evacuate the kids while Sherry appears and asks him for his orders. So he tells her to protect Celia's friends, even though she couldn't care less about anyone other than him after she leaves. He rushes to tell the kids to stay put as it's too dangerous to go outside. After, she summons her holy sword, and he notices that she hasn't awakened her full vampire abilities. So he asks her if she feels like pissing herself, and when she says yes, he summons his staff to protect her. Then the voids come flying at her, and she beheads them, turning back to see that he's roasted a couple of voids without breaking a nail. Back on the rooftop, the girls continue to shoot the voids when 3 ogre-class voids appear, but Sakuya uses her lightning sword to quickly take them down, while Regina uses her huge cannon to shoot down the ones in the air. However, they hear an explosion and see a Hydra-class void appear and wonder how the they're supposed to take it down. As more voids appear, Leo realizes that ordinary spells won't be enough to take them down, so he tells her to give him some cover while he prepares to use powerful magic. But he stops to wonder why he's currently protecting the humans he swore to defeat. Then he casts his wide destruction spell, and it rains fireballs on the voids as he tells her not to move. But the dragon-class void survives and uses its fire breath on her, but she escapes. As he struggles to say his chants fast enough, Blackus appears and attacks the void, giving him enough time to cast his gravity spell to crush it. Immediately the ground begins to open up, and tree roots emerge, wrapping around her body and dragging her below, leaving behind her earring. But before he can get to her, more roots spring up and a face forms, which he recognizes to be Arakel. The year 434, an uglier version of Leonis, returned to his fortress where he was greeted by Roselia, who asked him how his battle went, so he bragged, saying he died twice but she should see the other guy. Then he showed her the treasures he won for her, so she told him she had a gift for him too and revealed his holy sword from when he was a hero, but changed it into a demon sword to fit his new status. However, she said that it could only be drawn if a certain condition had been met. In the present, Leo realizes Arakel is the cause of the stampede and sends a fire blast at him, which causes him to retreat underground, and he calls out for Celia, but after getting no response, he sees that the seal on his hand is still intact, meaning she's still alive. Before he goes in, Blackus returns to help, and he tells him of Arakel's return, which he believes should mean that Roselia must have resurrected too. Then Blackus asks him what's up with the children staring at him, so he heads over to them to tell them to hide inside, and they thank him for protecting them and ask him to rescue Celia. After giving them his word, he casts a barrier spell to protect them and summons his skeletal warriors to guard them. When he returns to Blackus, they hear a voice coming from Celia's earring and notice finds drone as she tries to establish contact with her, saying they need more support in fighting the Hydra-class void. So he informs her that she's been kidnapped by the voids and asks her to use her holy sword to determine her location. But when she asks him to wait for a platoon to handle it, he tells her to use her drones to view the area and she sees that he's him. So she agrees and picks up Celia's biosignature at the power plant. After hearing this, he rides Blackus, and they head toward the plant. But on the way, he asks why he sent Sherry off to protect the humans when they're about to face one of the 6 heroes. So he responds and says that the humans have useful abilities. But Blackus calls bullshit, so he confesses that he's grown to like the humans. As they reach a dead end, he blasts it open with his fire magic and finds Arakel. So he blasts him with his internal flame, but he regenerates instantly. After that, he expresses his surprise to see that he didn't perish in their last battle, and Leo reveals that he only sealed away his soul, but he tells him that it was pointless as this world will be rebuilt along with the empty star. As he wonders what the fuck he means by empty star, hundreds of faces appear from the roots and begin to sing, and he realizes they're the old saints from their ancient battle. At the same time, Celia tries to free herself, but is unable to, but Arakel doesn't wait around and goes straight for him, as he evades and attacks with a crystal shower, and Blackus follows up with an energy blast. However, when they land, they realize their attacks have been ineffective as he's sucking away their mana. Suddenly, they see magic seals forming and laser beams rain down on them, so they dodge and counter with their fire and energy blast. But he blocks them, and they realize that he has unlimited energy from the mana crystal, and can use several spells using the old saints. So he comes up with a risky plan and charges forward, while she continues to struggle, which causes her to lose blood, but she summons her holy sword. Suddenly her eyes turn red and blades form from her blood and cut through the vines just as Leo locates her, and sends his mana-infused blood into her, giving her wings. After she breaks out, Blackus retreats to recover, and they reunite. However, Arakel begins to cast multiple spells that could blow up the entire city, so he tells her to give him some cover, as he takes care of it. When he flies up, he holds his staff, and Blackus warns him to be sure of what he's choosing. Then he remembers his conversation with Roselia, who told him that it is forbidden to draw on the sword unless it is to protect his kingdom. Immediately he unsheaths the sword and claims the Assault Gardens as his own, swearing to protect its people as his subjects, which allows him to use its power. And he sends a blinding attack that obliterates Arakel and ends the stampede. So they meet up with the rest of the platoon and head back to the dorm, where he rests after being drained of his mana. Then she comes to offer him some food but says using her holy sword drained her and asks if she can get some. So he allows her and she sucks on him while the other girls come in and are shocked to see she's also cultured. Meanwhile, a ship approaches with the princess, as she plans to visit the city and appreciate the holy swordsman that took down the voids. Later, Leo heads to the vault to do some research, but when his access is denied, an owl spirit tells him that he needs approval from the administration bureau to proceed. Then Regina comes up behind him and holds him close when he tells her they shouldn't be doing this in public. She tells him he should be more grateful for her free melons. After he explains that he wants to research the language that was all over the ruins where they found him, hoping to uncover his past. So she helps him bypass the spirit, and they get in. While she helps him search, they receive notifications for a commendation ceremony held by the princess, and he sees this as an opportunity to scout out the upper-class humans. So they agree to meet later, but she says she'll sit this one out and leaves. Meanwhile, a group of demi-humans plan to kidnap the princess when they are approached by Sharnak, who tells them she's willing to give them power that is greater than a holy sword. So she summons her sword and uses a magic circle to give him power, which he uses to cut down a tree with one strike. Then she tells them that their demon swords are gifts granted by the goddess, and asks them to capture and deliver the holy swordsman, so they can be used as a sacrifice. Later he heads to a market to get a gift for Celia, and there, he learns that elves, wolves, and other demi-humans live in a place called the Conservation Ward. Afterward, the princess appears on the ship, as Regina watches from afar, while he meets up with the rest of the platoon and hands Celia a keychain. She thanks him but warns him that this kind of ruse will make him a demon in bed. But before he can test it out on her, Fenris interrupts and asks what her disgraceful platoon is doing at the ceremony. But Fine tells her to knock it off, so she leaves. Meanwhile, on the ship, the demi-humans appear and attack the guards, stealing their faces to impersonate them. Somewhere on the ship, Leo looks through the records and confirms that someone is trying to cover up the past, and he can't find out why sorcery died out and how magic tech developed. After, Celia appears in a bikini with the children, asking him to go swimming, and as he looks at her, he feels his holy sword rising and tries to refuse, but she promises to teach him how to swim. So he agrees and uses her cannons as motivation to keep going. Meanwhile, Regina sits alone on the dock, wondering what she's even doing, just as the princess walks down the hallway with her guards. But they get attacked, so she releases her spirit pet, and it escapes, but Sharnak says it's no use. Back in the hall, the demi-humans reveal themselves, trapping the students and guests with their demon swords, and when Fenris points out that it should be impossible for them to have holy swords and tries to stand up to them, the old elf threatens to detonate an apple bomb. So they round up everyone and tie them up after confiscating their phones, explaining that they've taken the princess hostage, and when they're asked what they want, they say that they want their friends to be released from prison. However, Fenris continues to defy them, which angers the wolfman, but she reminds him that they must keep them alive for the goddess. After hearing about the goddess, Leo tells Celia that he'll check if the princess is safe and slips into his shadow. Meanwhile, the princess is forced to start the ship's engine and head toward the capital, but she realizes that a Void's Reef is on the way, so he tells her to sail around it, but Sharnak tells her to head straight for it, revealing that she never gave a shit about their plans. When he realizes this, he tries to attack her, but the demon's sword backfires, and he burns to death while he tells the others to do as she says if they don't want to end up the same way. Back at the dock, Regina finds the princess pet and touches it, and she immediately learns about the situation on the ship. So she jumps on board before it takes off and runs into Leo, where she tells him her sister is in danger. She tells him that on the night she was born, a red star called Scarlet Calamity appeared in the sky, which represented a bad omen for the royal family, causing her to be sentenced to death. However, a duke who realized how messed up that was secretly bought her and raised her as his own, as she pretended to be a maid to hide her identity. She says that the princesses can communicate with spirits, so they follow behind as the spirit pet leads the way to the princess. Back at the banquet, Fine tells Celia that a hidden drone was able to analyze the bomb and found a way to delay the explosion for a second, so she tells her to give her time to prepare as she grabs a sharp object nearby and cuts herself. Meanwhile, Leo and Regina reach the control room but find no sign of the princess, so he suggests that she link with her through the spirit medium, but she hesitates, not wanting to reveal her identity. But he tells her that she's not important, and she agrees. After linking to the princess, she calls herself a random medium and asks where they're headed, and she says they're headed toward the flight dock, but asks her to prioritize the ship, which is heading toward a void reef. So she gives her the password to control the ship, and when Regina explains the situation, he tells her to focus on the ship while he rescues the princess. Then he busts through the glass and jumps out. At the same time, Celia successfully sneaks her blood to the old elf, but before Fine can activate the jammer, Fenris begins to protest, and just as the wolf is tempted to slice her up, Sakuya appears by the table and distracts him while Fenris tackles him to the ground, as he orders the elf to detonate the bomb. However, Fine uses her drone to jam the signal while Celia destroys his wand. Then Sakuya takes out the Horned Woman, and Fenris summons her Frost Wolves to deal with the Wolfman, leaving Celia to finish off the old elf. Afterward, they retrieve their phones and she tries to contact Leo, but when she's unsuccessful, she looks outside and realizes they're in the middle of a void reef. Immediately, voids start to come on board, and the Frost Wolves hold them off while the students protect the other guests and evacuate them from the room. Then she hears from him using the keychain he gave her and updates him on the situation. So he tells her to help Regina while he makes arrangements to take care of the void, and he catches up to the princess and the demi-humans, sees them boarding a plane. As Regina struggles to hold off the voids, Celia reaches her and takes them out, just as Sakuya and Fenris take out the voids at the banquet. However, a brain-eater void emerges, and she tells them to leave it to her. So they close the doors behind them, and she summons a demon sword to face the void. Meanwhile, Regina reaches the lower deck as Celia guards her, and she inputs the password Scarlet Calamity to access the ship's operating system and steers it away. Back on the flight deck, Sharnik tries to take off, but is stopped by his shadow magic, and after he wipes out the surrounding voids, he promises to punish her. Meanwhile, Fine and Fenris run out of firepower, but Sherry cuts through them at an insane speed, remaining undetected, and Sakuya finishes up with the Brain Eater. At the same time, Leo confronts Sharnik, and when she asks him who he is, he reveals that he's the Demon Lord, but she calls Cap and casts a fire spell at him, but he casts it aside, recognizing it as a basic spell he created. Then he binds her and asks for her goal, and she says she's trying to create demon swords for the goddess. But when he asks which goddess she speaks of, she begins to malfunction, and suddenly a giant sword pierces through her, and he recognizes it as a demon lord-slaying blade, which then turns into a void lord. As he tries to figure out how this is possible, he senses fire blasts, but it deflects his magic and teleports above him, but he evades. Then Regina uses the ship's defenses to track its movements and fire multiple rounds at it, followed by a missile. But after launching the second missile, Celia emerges and joins him, so he tells her to buy him some time, and then he uses his demon sword to wipe out the Void Lord. The next day, the princess thanks the students for their bravery and asks for Leo and Regina. But when they say they couldn't make it, Celia delivers Regina's message to her, wishing her a joyous life. Back in the dorm, he rests his useless body again, and she comes in and asks if he's in the mood for a snack, wondering if he wants her to give it to him. But he tells her he'd rather help himself, but she kisses him and tells him to keep it as their little secret. Meanwhile, the defense forces try to round up the remaining demi-humans, and just when they think they've got them cornered, they hear a mysterious voice cast a petrification spell, which takes them all out immediately. Afterward, Leo shows up in a mask and the demi-humans ask who the hell it is this time. Leo orders them to bow down and casts a spell that brings everyone to their knees as he calls himself the Demon Lord Zolvatus. He offers them protection in exchange for their loyalty, and once they agree, he opens up an escape route that the humans won't be able to find. While he gives them instructions on what to do next, his phone rings and it turns out to be Celia, who scolds him for running off alone. Leo immediately disappears and the demi-humans are left wondering what that was about. That morning, Celia had gone to Leo's room, but found Sherry sweeping the floor. She rubbed her eyes to make sure, but when she looked again, Sherry was gone. She calls Leo to scold him for going off alone, then heads to the shower to get ready. At that moment, Leo returns to his room happy that he's one step closer to rebuilding his demon army. He walks out of his room to find Celia, but finds her casually stripping with her door open. He quickly looks away, but Regina walks in at the same time, but they scold her for not knocking instead. After, they sit down for breakfast, and when Celia sees Leo scarfing down sandwiches, she turns into a nagging mother and tells him to eat his vegetables. Leo wonders why a dead girl is worrying about his health, but then again, she could be trying to keep her blood bag healthy. Regina then brings up the rumors of their dorm being haunted thanks to a big black dog creeping around and a ghost girl appearing mysteriously. Celia is glad she's not going crazy and says she saw the maid ghost sweeping Leo's room, which almost causes him to choke. Celia asks him where he wandered off to earlier, and the gifted liar quickly says he was doing some solo training, so he doesn't let her down, which instantly rizzes her up so she loses focus. Regina mentions their upcoming match with Fenris' platoon and says they've come up with a detailed plan, so Celia gets excited to use her holy sword in a match for the first time. The day of the match arrives and Celia and Leo work together to take out the other team's flag, earning them a point. The rest of the school watches from afar, including important figures from the command center. Back on the field, Regina acts as the defense for all their flags, while Fine points out the direction of approaching enemies. Sakuya charges through the middle, fighting off Fenris' frost wolves as a diversion so Celia can sneak through. Unfortunately, Fenris wolves attack her and Fenris reveals she saw their plan coming from a mile away. Sakuya is probably losing focus in chasing the wolves, while Fenris' team is headed for their main flag. Fenris intends to settle their longtime rivalry, so she recalls two of her frost wolves to her fists and gets ready to face Celia, while she tells her teammate to focus on the kid. The girls begin to face off and Celia realizes that if she defeats Fenris there, they take the win. However, Fenris tosses her aside like a rag doll and sends her frost wolves to freeze her in place. Meanwhile, her teammate tries to take out Leo with a crossbow, but he easily blocks her sad attempt at attacks and uses his shadow technique to take her down. At that moment, Celia insists she didn't come this far just to lose to her again. Then her sword starts glowing and she breaks free. She leaps up to attack and Fenris tries to guard herself, but ultimately loses as Celia breaks through her ice defense. The system records the 11th platoon's loss, and Leo stares at her proudly. The representatives from the control room lament how both teams were pretty stupid with their strategies, but the commander says their inexperience might be a good thing. Later, Celia gives Leo a good wash, though he tries to tell her his hands work just fine. Celia assures him that it's perfectly fine for kids to bathe with their guardians and continues. The other girls happen to be in the bath right next to them, so Regina walks up to Sakuya and grabs her plot balls, saying that they seem bigger. She tries to get Leo to look, but he manages to resist the temptation. Later, his torture continues as he sits apart from the girls, while they discuss their performance in the match. They realize they'd have been toast if Fenris wasn't so obsessed with their rivalry, and agree to work on their teamwork. The girls have a hands-in moment and tell Leo to turn around and join them, but the Shy Demon Lord can't bring himself to turn around and joins them without looking. Meanwhile, a mysterious man named Nephagus laments who could have defeated Sharnak while he feeds demon swords and holy swords into a stone. He then looks up and announces that it's almost time for the goddess to reawaken, while some large city ruins appear from nowhere. Later, the 18th platoon is summoned for a mission, and the woman shows them the footage of the ruins. Celia recognizes the ruins as her hometown that vanished into the void 6 years ago. The woman says that the city is moving toward them at a steady pace, which means it would reach them in 7 days. To make matters worse, they received distress signals on 2 separate occasions, which means there could be survivors. The woman says it could be faulty equipment, but to make sure she wants their platoon to do a sweep of the city and investigate the distress signals within 72 hours. After she finishes briefing them for the mission, Fine asks why exactly they were chosen for the mission. The woman tries to shrug it off, but when Fine asks if it's because Celia survived the last incident, she admits it's part of the reason, but claims their platoon is quite excellent too. Celia promises not to let her down but worries about Leo's safety. Leo insists that he's a member of the platoon too, so she promises to protect him. The next morning, the girls are ready to leave while Leo meets with Blackus and Sherry and tells him he recognized the crest of the Sacred Order on the ruins coming toward them, so he needs to find out who is behind it. Blackus offers to watch over the city while he's away, and Leo tells Sherry he'll need her to come with him as backup. After, the group takes off and Regina offers her lap for Leo to rest on, but Celia objects and says he can rest her head on her pits instead. However, Regina pulls out an earpick, and since Celia didn't bring one, Regina forces Leo between her laps and puts it in. The feeling sends Leo to an old memory with Rosalia, where she told him that she would soon disappear, but would be reincarnated 1,000 years in the future. She asks him if she'll come looking for her regardless of the form she takes, and he promises he won't rest until he finds her again. When Leo comes to, he sees Celia smiling at him and Regina announces they've arrived. They land the ship and plan to split up with Celia and Leo, heading for the power plant while Fine, Sakuya, and Regina investigate the distress signal. Fine has one of her drones go with Leo and Celia, and similarly, Leo has Sherry go with the girls to protect them. As they continue, at that moment, Celia's device detects void activity, and suddenly, some powerful beams start coming down from above, causing a large object to pin Celia down. When Leo looks up, he sees the most hideous creature to ever exit aside from Arikal, of course. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, a green-haired girl appears wondering if she's really 1,000 years in the future. She's surprised to see no trees and plants and quickly grabs some clothes off an old mannequin. It turns out she's been sent to this point in time because the goddess is about to be reborn. While she looks around, Nephekis appears behind her and recognizes her as the elf hero Arl. She demands to know if he's also returned from the past, and he confirms this but says that unlike him, she seeks to destroy the goddess vessel. When she realizes that he's the enemy, she charges at him, but he disappears instantly and summons a void angel to take care of her. Meanwhile, the creature's twin is about to vaporize Celia, so Leo rushes to her side and uses his shadow magic to teleport her to safety. He stays back and tries to fight the void off, but it appears to have holy protection against all forms of low-level magic. Meanwhile, the girls notice the battle in the distance and realize that's where Leo and Celia went. Fine says her drone's been taken out, so they agree to move quickly. Back at the fight, Leo dodges the powerful beams of light and swats away the arrows coming at him. However, before it can get back up, Leo casts a fireball spell that seems to do the trick. He casts a lightning spell to speed up the incineration. After, he rushes to Celia, who's having trouble standing up. He tells her not to push it, since she'll need some time recovering from a serious injury. While Leo thinks of the next course of action, some glowy figures appear nearby, and he gets ready to cook again, but Celia stops him. She recognizes the crest on the glowing man, and he confirms that he was one of her father's men named William. He and his men are mere ghosts now, but they're responsible for the distress signal that went out. The men bow to her and say that the signaling was actually a warning to stop the tragedy of 6 years ago from repeating itself. Apparently, a new Void Lord has appeared in the ruins, which is why they were able to manifest their ghost forms. Leo finds it fishy that this conveniently happened after Arikal was defeated, but he can't figure out why. William says the Void Lord is using the energy of the power plant and will soon awaken. So Celia says they'll need proof to stand a chance of evacuating the 7th Assault Garden. However, Leo reminds her she's in no shape for that yet and needs to rest. So William offers to take them to the mansion. Soon a limo pulls up to take them, but Leo suspects that it would be too slow, so he summons his equally lifeless horses to help. The horses pull the limo like a chariot, and Leo brags that they're underworld derby champions. Meanwhile, the girls are still wandering around the city. Sakuya suddenly stops them when they come across Arl, thinking she's a miracle survivor. Sakuya stops Regina from getting too close, while Arl tries to attack with her sword. When Sakuya sees how skilled she is, she tells the others to stand aside and let her handle this. When Arl sees their strange powers, she assumes they're friends of Nephekis, but the girls have no idea what she's talking about. Arl charges at them, but Sakuya stops her and sends an attack which Arl dodges, shocking the girls. However, after an intense face-off, Sakuya bests Arl and declares the fight over, though she admits she would have lost if Arl was not wounded. Meanwhile, Celia starts to feel better and asks Leo if she can have some of his blood. Leo barely finishes agreeing before she jumps on him and begins to suck away. Leo worries that she's about to suck him dry and intends to force her to stop, but Fine radios in and breaks her out of her feeding frenzy. Celia updates her on the situation with the Void Lord and suggests they regroup to check it out. Fine agrees, but says they'll have to finish treating the survivor they found first. Celia is shocked to hear this, so they agree to meet up at her family's estate later. After Celia hangs up, Leo tells her to take it easy on the suction action next time. So she apologizes but says she's ready to go another round. He tells her to hold that thought and brings out a red dress for her, explaining that it has the ability to convert her mana into physical strength. He warns her that it would consume a lot of mana and she should use it wisely. Then he kind of sucks the dress inside her and tells her she only needs to imagine herself wearing it to call it out. To add to that, he also hands her 3 skeleton keychains and calls them good luck charms of some sort. Back on the other side of town, Regina finishes patching up Arl while Sakuya returns with new clothes and asks why she attacked them anyway. Arl explains that she assumed they were working with her enemy who controls these insanely large monsters, so the girls assume she's referring to the Voids. Fine interrupts and points out that there's no record of her in the 3rd Assault Garden's database and asks where she came from. Arl throws the question right back at them, and Fine says they're on inspection from the 7th Assault Garden. In return, Arl says she's there to vanquish the goddess, but when Fine wonders who she's talking about, Arl realizes the legends have been forgotten. She says she has to get back to her mission, but when the girls see the shape she's in, they tell her they can't leave her and hand her some snacks in the meantime. Sherry continues to watch them and recognizes Arl as the last person to train under one of the 6 heroes, and even tried several times to take out the Demon Lord. Meanwhile, Nephicus continues to wait for the goddess awakening when one of the Voids appears and reports the angel's defeat. He wonders who could have been powerful enough to defeat that thing and decides it might be time to take out the trash. Meanwhile, Leo and Celia finally arrive at her old family estate, but the sight of her ruined childhood home makes her sad. They head into the mansion, and Leo finds himself a comfortable chair that brings him a little piece of nostalgia himself, so he immediately pulls out his bone and starts to stroke it. Celia continues to go through the house, and when she reaches her father's old study, she breaks down in tears at what it's become. The ghost men decide to give her a look at her past and bring up a memory of her dad reading a story about the evil demon king that was defeated by a hero blessed by the gods. However, this sweet walk down memory lane was rudely interrupted by none other than Nephicus. Celia mistakes him for a survivor, which apparently happens to be the greatest insult he's ever heard. As punishment, he casts a fire spell right at her and knocks her out while the chaos alerts Leo that something's wrong. While Celia's out cold, she remembers the last time she saw her dad, just at the beginning of the stampede 6 years ago. Celia had offered to fight alongside him, but when he refused her, he bent down and reminded her of the Demon Lord's story, assuring her that though the Demon Lord was evil, he would appear in their world someday and defeat the Void. Back in the present, Celia opens her eyes and sees 3 skeleton men guarding her. Nephicus thought he did her in with that attack, but he is surprised to see the undead before him. He immediately assumes Celia is the one who summoned the rotting bones and decides to put her defense to the test. However, before he can unleash his attack, Leo runs up and blasts him with fire magic. Celia asks who the piles of bones are, and he tells her they're the skeleton keyholders he gave her earlier. At that, the boneheads introduce themselves, each warriors in their own right, but also idiots who argue over their accomplishments. Suddenly, Nephicus rises and applauds Leo on his magic, saying he'd be ashes if he were an ordinary human. Leo instantly recognizes him and wonders what the hell he's doing here, but Nephicus has no idea who he is. He launches another fire attack, but Leo overpowers it instantly, making Nephicus wonder how that's possible. Just as Leo is about to ask what exactly he's after, the ground begins to rumble, causing Nephicus to laugh. He announces that Saint Tyrus devoured his offerings and became the goddess vessel. He then opens up a dark portal, and though Leo tries to grab him with his shadow technique, his arms are repelled and Nephicus gets away. However, he recognizes Nephicus as an ally of the Lord of the Underworld, who regularly attended the Demon Lord meetings. At that moment, the symbol of the Sacred Order appears in the sky, and the corpse men advise Leo that they should probably run for it. When they get to a safe distance, they see the so-called goddess emerge from the ground and William and the other ghost men appear and confirm that's the Void Lord. The other Voids circle around the goddess, singing a hymn that Leo recognizes, along with the remains of Tyrus herself. Meanwhile, the girls also see the chaos unfolding and Fine tries to contact Celia, but is unable to get through to her. Sakuya hands Arl the rest of the snacks and tells her to stay hidden while the ship sends out an emergency flare. The goddess starts to make her move, so the voids around her begin to attack and Leo and Celia prepare to take them on. At the same time, Fine says she's requested backup and advised an evacuation, but they're probably stuck there either way. Their best bet is to meet up with Celia and the kid, so Regina and Sakuya will have to hold off the voids while she looks for a means of transportation. Outside, Celia and the Skeletors try to defeat the voids, but they simply continue to regenerate. Regina and Sakuya are facing a similar problem and wonder how to counter them, so Fine tries to scan them to see. Outside, Leo blasts one of their heads off, and it's unable to regenerate, so he tells the others of their weakness just as Fine finishes her analysis and identifies the heads as their weak spots. Both groups manage to take out a significant number of voids, but they notice that the goddess is now coming their way. Meanwhile, Fine finds some bikes they can use, so the girls head out while Arl follows closely behind them. Back on the battleground, the Skeleton brothers continue to lay waste to the voids alongside Celia, while Leo prepares to take out the big one. He casts a spell that sends a mini sun toward the goddess, and though it appears to burn through it at first, it comes out unscathed. Even Leo is surprised that she managed to endure a high-level spell, but things only get worse when she begins to activate several magic circles. Leo and the Boneheads quickly create a defensive barrier, just as the goddess rains down fireballs at them, engulfing the entire area in flames. Afterward, more voids fly in their direction, so Leo asks Celia to give him some cover while he tries to finish it off. She agrees and the skeleton men offer to help too, so she cuts herself and uses her blood ability, and together they begin to take out a large horde of voids. Leo flies up and unsheaths his demon sword to put this goddess abomination out of its misery. However, just as he's about to strike, his sword begins to resonate, and he hears Roselia's voice coming from the Void Lord, telling him it's impossible for him to use the sword on her. Leo refuses to believe it's really Roselia and manages to attack, but the goddess protects against his strike, one of which pierces right through Leo. He falls to the ground unconscious and Celia tries to go to his side, but notices that the goddess is powering up another attack. With that, she summons the magic dress within her and sends a powerful attack at the goddess, which manages to bring her down temporarily. The skeleton men continue to attack the rest of the monsters, and after, they'd all gather at Leo's side. Leo goes back to that memory of him and Roselia, where he promises to find her in the future. However, Roselia made him promise that if she happened to turn into something else in the future, she wants him to defeat her with his demon sword and find the real her instead. In the present, Leo wishes Celia would take all the blood she needs and run away to safety, but instead, she begins to summon her own blood to heal him. Thanks to Celia, Leo opens his eyes with new determination. Since his demon sword was able to attack the so-called goddess, then it couldn't possibly be the real Roselia. He plans to take care of the fake goddess once and for all and thanks Celia for healing him. He then asks for a lining from her dress to mend his own clothes, so she tears a piece for him and he cleans up nicely. The Void Lord begins to get back up, so Leo asks Celia for backup as he takes care of it for good. However, he admits his power has waned and hopes he'll be able to unleash that attack one more time. William interrupts and asks him to convert their souls into an energy source for his magic. In addition, they offer the souls of the citizens that met an untimely death and also want a bit of revenge. Leo figures Tira's resurrection ability is responsible for the new ghost town, so he agrees to their plan and says he'll carry out their wishes. He then recites a spell and summons a magic ball that begins to suck all the souls inside. Leo tells them he's got a better job for them. He summons skeleton shells and places the men inside them so they can fight again. Leo tells Celia to lead them into battle while he spends the time gathering all the energy into his demon sword. Celia accepts the responsibility of guarding him and uses her blood to form spears for the men. The OG Skeletors don't plan to be outdone and get ready to do some damage too. Meanwhile, Fine finally finishes hacking into the bikes, but as they're about to leave, Arl walks up and asks to go with them. They try to refuse since she is obviously still injured, but a void comes up behind her and she takes it down with one strike. She tells the girls that her sword has the power to defeat the enemies they're facing, and when Sakuya sees her determination, she suggests they take her along. Back on the field, the Walking Dead face off against the voids and take as many out as possible while Leo continues to suck in the souls of the citizens. The girls try to head over to them quickly, but they're soon surrounded by voids, So Fine takes control of all the vehicles so the girls can focus on taking them out. At the same time, Celia instructs the men to change formations, but while she's distracted, a void sneaks up on her and knocks her down. But thankfully, one of the bones catches her. She admits that her dress is taking a heavier toll than she expected, but even so, she doesn't plan to stand by helplessly like 6 years ago, and would rather risk her life. The boneheads agree with her determination until one of them reminds them that they're already dead anyway. Leo continues to charge up, but so does the Void Lord as it creates magic circles for another powerful attack. Leo tells everyone to run for it, so Celia gives the men instructions, and while the voids rain down fireballs, they all manage to get to safety while Leo continues his magic. Meanwhile, Fine worries that she's unable to reach Celia. Arl sees that the Void Lord is still pretty far away, so she tries to save her energy till she's in striking distance. They reach a gap in the road, but Fine activates the thrusters, and they're able to clear it with no problems. Just then, a huge void comes right over them, and they're unable to evade it. But before it can vaporize them, a rope comes out of nowhere and smashes it into a nearby ruin. Then, Sherry laments her job being too easy and goes back to munching her donut. Back at the main battle, Leo's pretty much done with his soul gathering, but he sees the Void Lord powering up yet another attack. Leo starts to gather his magic into his sword to stop it, so the Void Lord picks up a giant building and throws it at them. Celia says she's got it and flies forward to destroy it, giving Leo enough time to finish his incantation and power up his sword. Before Leo can strike, the Void pulls out a high-level protection spell, which shocks Leo, but at that moment, the girls get close enough to assist and Regina and Sakuya use their power to attack the barrier. Arl follows after and uses her sword, which instantly takes down the barrier and injures the Void Lord. Leo wonders who is capable of such a feat while the girls crash land off the bikes. This gives Leo the chance to attack and expose the Void Lord as a fake goddess. He strikes with his demon sword, which finally obliterates the fake goddess, while everyone watches and Celia remembers her father's words. The skies return to normal and William and his men say their goodbyes since they no longer have any regrets. So Celia promises to keep fighting on behalf of the family and watches them vanish forever. Now that the battle is over, Leo retrieves his boneheads into his shadow just as Regina runs over and hugs Celia. Fine and Sakuya come up behind her with Arl, though she's unconscious. Sakuya praises Arl as the one who defeated the Demon King, and when Leo sees her, he instantly recognizes her. The reinforcements finally show up to help, and the girls get on one of their ships. There, Leo wonders what the elf hero is doing in this era, but when Celia asks him what's bugging him, he shrugs it off. She then tells him about the stories her dad would tell her of a demon king that would ride skeletal horses and breathe fire from his mouth. Leo irritatedly says he never breathed fire, but Celia asks him how he would know and he backs off. He asks how the stories ended, and she tells him the hero always defeated him, so he calls them utter trash. Later, Leo meets with Blackus and Sherry, and Blackus remembers Nefekis from the old days, saying something was always off about him. They plan to get some answers out of the bastard the next time they see him, and Sherry warns him to be wary of the elf too. Leo asks what's up with her, and Sherry says she's being kept in the airport's medical facility, so he instructs Sherry to figure out what her goal is. Sherry then points out that he gave Celia the red dress, and when Leo doesn't understand what the issue is, she holds her close and calls him a dumbass. At that moment, Celia calls for him, so Blackus and Sherry disappear, while Celia walks in wearing nothing but a towel. Leo tries to remind her what boundaries mean, but she asks him for another sucking session. He tells her to go easy on him this time, but it seems unlikely since she jumps right on him and starts sucking. Meanwhile, Fine goes over all the recent incidents and wonders what connects them all, and as she does her research, she finds a heavily protected file. Sakuya, on the other hand, continues to practice her sword skills, now inspired by Arl's expertise. Speaking of Arl, she wakes up and figures that her mission isn't complete since she hasn't disappeared yet. She grabs her sword and uses it to break out of the hospital, while Leo smiles at how chaotic his kingdom is. As he continues with his new life, he plans to expand his territory till he has every human under his control. That's it for today's video. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. See you in the next one.